The pen scratched across the paper, its steel nib leaving the name Helena Hubbard in its wake, a name that was not her own. Morgan applied just enough pressure to feel the faint indentation on the page beneath, a permanent ghost of the signature. The ink was a severe, business-like black, and it looked alien to her, a forgery of a life she'd invented 2 months ago for this exact moment. Across the polished mahogany table, Mr. Garrett, a man whose face was a collection of soft, non-committal lines, offered a placid smile. He saw only a successful transaction, the transfer of a significant asset to a new, anonymous LLC. He didn't see the tremor in Morgan's hand as she pushed the document back across the table. He didn't see the years of simmering silence that had paid for his commission. He saw Helena Hubbard, a woman with impeccable credit and a quiet, almost unnerving poise. He didn't see Morgan, a ghost haunting her own life, preparing to haunt someone else's. "The wire transfer was confirmed an hour ago," Mr. Garrett said, his voice smooth as worn leather. He stacked the signed pages into a neat pile, tapping them into perfect alignment. "The funds have been dispersed to the seller. All that's left is this." He slid a small, heavy brass key and a modern electronic fob across the table. They came to a stop just before her folded hands. Morgan stared at them. The key was for the front door, a traditional touch for a house that was anything but. A new build, a modern farmhouse monstrosity of white siding and black trim, perched on a manicured acre in the city's most coveted new suburb. The fob was for the garage and the security system. They were the tangible proof of an impossible sum of money, a sum she had bled herself dry to accumulate. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every penny saved from a decade of relentless, joyless work was crystallized in the glint of that brass. She picked them up. The key was cold, the fob smooth and light. She closed her fist around them, the metal edges digging into her palm. The faint, satisfying pain anchored her to the moment, cutting through the disorienting sense of unreality. She had done it. After all this time, the first, most crucial part of the plan was complete. "Congratulations, Miss Hubbard," Mr. Garrett said, extending his hand. Morgan met his grip. Her handshake was firm, brief. "Thank you for your efficiency, Mr. Garrett." She didn't smile. A smile would be a betrayal of the cold, clean purpose that had hollowed her out and then filled her back up again. She left the sterile, air-conditioned office and stepped into the oppressive heat of the late afternoon. The city hummed around her, a symphony of indifference. For 20 minutes, she drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the air conditioning blasting her face but failing to touch the chill deep inside her. She passed familiar streets without seeing them, her focus narrowed to a single destination. When she arrived, she didn't pull into the driveway. She parked across the street, beneath the shade of an old oak that had no business being in a neighborhood this new. The house stood proud and perfect, almost arrogant in its pristine newness. It had a wraparound porch, a slate gray metal roof, and windows so large and numerous they seemed to drink the sunlight. It was a house built for show, for family Christmases and summer barbecues and an audience of admiring neighbors. It was Kim's dream house. Morgan had heard about it for years in breathless detail during the times they were still speaking. Kim had bookmarked the listing, taped the floor plan to her refrigerator, and fantasized about the life she would live within its walls. The chef kitchen for her dinner parties, the master suite with the spa bathroom, the sprawling backyard for the children she planned to have. A perfect house for a perfect life, one built on a foundation Morgan could no longer see without seeing rot. Morgan finally got out of the car, the key now warm in her pocket. Her footsteps were loud on the unnervingly quiet street. She walked up the bluestone path, past landscaping that was still taking root, and stood before the dark green door. She slid the brass key into the lock. The click of the tumblers turning was a sound of profound, earth-shattering finality. The door swung open into a cavernous 2-story foyer. The air inside was still and thick with the scent of fresh paint, new carpet, and sawdust. Sunlight streamed through the huge windows, illuminating floating dust motes in golden shafts. It was empty, a blank canvas, a beautiful hollow shell. She walked through the echoing rooms, her practical flats making soft, lonely thuds on the pale oak floors. The living room with its soaring ceiling and marble fireplace, the kitchen, an expanse of white quartz and stainless steel, still bearing the smudged fingerprints of the construction crew. She ran her hand along a countertop, its surface cool and unblemished. This was the altar where Kim had planned to perform the rites of her perfect domestic life.
Morgan felt nothing. No joy of ownership, no thrill of victory. Just a great, silent stillness. The rage that had fueled her for so long had burned down to this, a cold, hard, diamond bright point of intention. She wandered upstairs into the master bedroom and stood before the wall of windows that overlooked the backyard. She thought of a different house, an old, creaking Victorian with peeling paint and a porch swing that groaned like a tired old man. A house that smelled of her mother's lavender soap and her father's pipe tobacco. A house whose every flaw was a part of her own memory, a part of her own soul. The house Kim had sold out from under her, erasing their shared history for a down payment. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. A few taps and she was looking at the rental application Kim had submitted last week to Hubbard Properties, LLC. It was all there. Kim's financial details, her glowing references, her heartfelt cover letter about why this was her forever home. She looked out the window at the perfect, empty lawn. She thought she erased my memories. She didn't realize she sold me my revenge. The silence in the house was absolute. It was a clean, manufactured silence, not the comfortable, layered silence of a home lived in. Morgan sat on the floor of the master bedroom, her back against the wall, the brass key and plastic fob on the floor beside her. For the first time in 2 years, the frantic forward momentum of her plan ceased, and the past came rushing back in to fill the vacuum. It always did in the quiet moments. The past wasn't a memory. It was a physical sensation. It was the phantom weight of a cordless phone receiver in her hand, its plastic warm against her ear. It was the low-grade hum of the fluorescent lights in her cramped Seattle apartment, a city she'd moved to for a job she didn't love, but that paid her just enough to dream of one day moving back home to help fix up the old house. "I have amazing news," Kim's voice had chirped over the line, 3,000 miles and a world of difference away. Morgan had smiled, a genuine, unthinking smile. She'd pictured Kim in the kitchen of their childhood home, leaning against the worn linoleum counter, twirling the phone cord around her finger like they did when they were teenagers. "What is it?" Morgan had asked, already anticipating a promotion for Kim or an engagement. "I sold the house."
The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, nonsensical syllables. Morgan had stared at the gray, rain-streaked window of her apartment. "What house?" she'd asked, her voice small. A beat of hesitation from Kim, the first sign that she knew this was not a shared victory. "The house, Morg. Mom and Dad's house. Our house. I got an incredible cash offer, way over asking. We can finally be free of it." "Free of it?" The phrase landed like a punch to the sternum. Free of the porch where their father taught them to ride bikes? Free of the kitchen where their mother hummed off-key while baking? Free of the pencil marks on the pantry doorframe, tracking their growth from toddlers to gangly teens? You You sold it? Morgan's voice was a croak. Without talking to me? Kim, it's half mine. Legally, it was all mine, Kim had corrected her, her tone shifting from celebratory to defensive. Dad's will left it to me, since I was the one still living there, the one taking care of things. It was my burden, Morgan. The leaky roof, the furnace that sounded like a dying animal, the property taxes. You have no idea. Oh, but she did? She'd sent Kim money every month for 5 years, a significant chunk of her salary, explicitly for those repairs. Money she had assumed was going toward the house's upkeep, toward preserving their shared legacy until she could move back. The money I sent you, Kim, for the roof, for the furnace. That helped with the bills, sure, but this was a real solution, Kim had said, her voice airy, dismissive. A fresh start for me. For us. I've already put a down payment on a new condo. It's gorgeous. And your half is in an account. I'll send you the details. It's a lot of money, Morgan. We're finally secure. It wasn't about security. It was never about the money. It was about the erasure. Kim hadn't just sold a piece of property. She had unilaterally bulldozed the museum of their lives and sold the rubble for parts. She had taken Morgan's past, her future plans, her very identity as a daughter and a sister, and liquidated it. Morgan had flown home the next day. She didn't call Kim. She took a taxi from the airport straight to the Old Victorian on Chestnut Street. A garish, oversized sold sign was staked in the overgrown lawn like a victory flag. A massive construction dumpster already sat in the driveway, overflowing with the guts of her life. Splintered pieces of the porch swing, the faded floral wallpaper from her bedroom, the chipped porcelain of her mother's sink. She'd stood on the sidewalk, a stranger at her own eviction, and felt a cold, terrifying calm settle over her. The grief was so vast it collapsed inward, condensing into something hard and dense. It was in that moment, staring at the dumpster, that the idea began to form. Revenge wouldn't be a fiery explosion. It would be a quiet, meticulous construction. Now sitting in the hollow shell of Kim's future, Morgan pulled out her laptop. The plan required its next delicate step. She logged into a secure email account, manager@hubbardpropertiesllc.com, and began to type. Her fingers moved with precision, the language she used as sterile and impersonal as the house around her. To Kimberly Peterson, from Hubbard Properties, LLC. Subject, application for 12 Serenity Lane. Dear Miss Peterson, thank you for your interest in the property at 12 Serenity Lane. We are pleased to inform you that the owner, Miss Helena Hubbard, has reviewed your application and approved your tenancy. She paused, her finger hovering over the mouse. Helena Hubbard, a name plucked from a 19th century novel she'd loved as a child. A woman of quiet means and impeccable taste. Morgan had spent months building her. A post office box in a neighboring state, a driver's license with a photo of a vaguely familiar-looking woman from a stock image database, digitally aged and altered, an LLC registered through a service that guaranteed anonymity. Helena Hubbard was a phantom, a legal fiction with more power and wealth than Morgan had ever possessed. Helena was the weapon. She attached the lease agreement, a formidable document drafted by a lawyer she had paid in cash. It was standard, ironclad, and gave the landlord complete authority within the bounds of the law. She hit send and watched the email disappear into the digital ether. The response came in less than 10 minutes. The subject line was a string of exclamation points.
To Hubbard Properties, LLC. From Kimberly Peterson. Subject, reapplication for 12 Serenity Lane. Oh my gosh, I could literally cry right now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please extend my deepest gratitude to Ms. Hubbard. My fiancé and I are over the moon. We have been looking for our forever home for so long, and this is truly a dream come true. I've attached the signed lease. Let me know the next steps for the deposit and first month's rent. We are ready to go. Warmly, Kim. Morgan downloaded the attachment. There it was. 20 pages of legal jargon, and on the final page, Kimberly Peterson's signature.
It was a loopy, optimistic signature, full of carefree confidence. The signature of a woman who believed the world arranged itself for her benefit. Right below it was the line for the landlord, which Morgan now signed with the sharp, severe script she had practiced for months. Helena Hubbard. The mission was no longer just about payback for a stolen house. Staring at the two signatures, sister and fictional stranger, bound together by contract, Morgan felt the stakes shift. This was not a simple transactional revenge. It was an entanglement. She now had a legal, binding power over her sister's happiness. Every joy Kim would feel in this house, every dinner party, every holiday, every future memory with her new family would happen on Morgan's terms, under Morgan's roof. The power was intoxicating, but it was also heavy. It was a moral choice that would now have to be made every single day. Would she be a silent, invisible landlord, or would she use this power? Could she raise the rent arbitrarily? Could she deny a request to paint a room? Could she enforce the lease's strictest clauses for a minor infraction? The plan had been to take from Kim what she had taken from her, a home. But owning the house was one thing. Owning her sister's dream was another entirely. It tested her resolve in a way she hadn't anticipated. The cold, clean purpose was now muddied by the reality of the arrangement. She had wanted to create a perfect, poetic karma. She hadn't considered what it would require of her to maintain it, or what it might turn her into. She stood up, her joints cracking in the silent room. She walked to the large window and looked down at the pristine, empty backyard. She imagined Kim out there, laughing, setting up a barbecue. She imagined her future nieces or nephews running through sprinklers on the perfect lawn. And she, Morgan, would be the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand, the silent, watchful owner of it all. The thought brought no triumph, only a deep, profound, and terrifying stillness. The trap was set. Now she just had to wait for her sister to walk into it.
2 months later, the house was no longer a shell. It was a home, and it was undeniably Kim's. From her car parked in its usual spot under the oak tree, Morgan had watched the transformation. She saw the oversized sectional sofa delivered, the framed art prints hung, the festive autumn wreath placed on the dark green door. She saw Kim's fiancé, a blandly handsome man named Mark, mowing the lawn on Saturdays. She saw them hosting a housewarming party, the warm light from the large windows spilling onto the lawn, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, a faint, muffled insult carried on the evening air. Each observation was a small, sharp cut. Kim's life was proceeding with a frictionless, infuriating ease. She was living in her dream house, seemingly without a single backward glance at the rubble of their shared past. The monthly rent checks arrived on time, signed with Kim's cheerful scrawl made out to a faceless LLC. For Kim, Helena Hubbard was just a name on a lease, a benevolent, invisible benefactor. The cold, controlled patience that had sustained Morgan for so long began to fray. This silence was no longer a strategy, it was a cage. The power she held felt theoretical, useless. She was a god who refused to meddle, and her subject was thriving in blissful ignorance. The revenge was incomplete, a perfect weapon left on the shelf. She needed a confrontation, not a screaming match, not a dramatic reveal, but something that would pierce Kim's perfect bubble and make her understand. The opportunity came on a Tuesday, an email from Kim addressed to the management company. Subject: urgent. Leaky sink in master bathroom. Hi there, there's a pretty significant leak under the sink in the master bathroom. It seems to be coming from one of the pipes. Could you please send a plumber as soon as possible? I've put a bucket under it, but I'm worried about the new vanity getting damaged. Mark is out of town until Friday. Thanks, Kim. Morgan's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. not a plumber. Her. She replied as Helena Hubbard's property manager. Ms. Peterson, a maintenance person will be there this afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. to assess the issue. Please ensure someone is home to grant access. At 2:30 p.m., Morgan stood on the bluestone path, a generic gray tool bag in her hand. She wore a simple navy blue jumpsuit, the kind a professional handywoman might wear, and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. Her hair was tucked up inside it. She was anonymous. Serviceable. She rang the bell, the cheerful, melodic chime echoing the one their old house used to have.
The door swung open, and there was Kim. She looked happy, relaxed. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she wore yoga pants and a soft-looking sweater. Her smile was warm and ready for a stranger. "Hi, you must be from the property management. Thank you so much for coming so quickly." For a second, Morgan couldn't breathe. The raw, visceral shock of seeing her sister this close, this unsuspecting, was a physical blow. Kim looked right at her, her eyes scanning Morgan's face without a flicker of recognition. To her, Morgan was just the help. Morgan just nodded, keeping her head slightly lowered. She cleared her throat, her voice a low, rough version of itself. "Ma'am, here for the leak." "Oh, great. Come on in. Can I get you a water or anything?" "No, thank you," she managed. She stepped over the threshold, the smell of Kim's life washing over her. Cinnamon-scented candles, fresh laundry, something baking. It was a cozy, lived-in smell that felt like a personal betrayal. She followed Kim up the carpeted stairs, her eyes fixed on the back of her sister's head. Every step was a thunderclap in her own ears. In the master bathroom, a gleaming sanctuary of white tile and brushed nickel fixtures, a small pot was catching a steady plink, plink, plink of water from the U-bend under the sink. "It's right there," Kim said, pointing. "I just noticed it this morning." Morgan knelt, placing her tool bag on the pristine bath mat. She deliberately kept her back to Kim, feigning an intense focus on the plumbing. She opened the bag and began pulling out tools, a wrench, a flashlight, a roll of Teflon tape. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the cold metal. "This house is just our absolute dream," Kim chattered on, leaning against the doorframe. "I have to tell you, Miss Hubbard, the owner, she must be an amazing person. We feel so lucky. We were looking for so long after I sold my family's old place." Morgan's hand froze, the wrench hovering over the pipe fitting. "It was a hard decision," Kim continued, her voice taking on a wistful, slightly melancholy tone. "The house had been in our family forever. My sister didn't really get it. She lived so far away, she didn't understand what a burden it had become. The upkeep was a nightmare." Liar. The words screamed in Morgan's mind. "The money I sent you, the 5 years of my life I put on hold for that house, for you. Sometimes you just have to let go of the past to build a future, you know? I hope my sister understands that one day. I sent her half of the money, of course. A lot of it. I'm sure she's put it to good use." The cold fury that had been simmering for 2 years finally boiled over. It was a clean, righteous fire. Morgan tightened the wrench on the PVC fitting, a simple, common fix. But she didn't stop when it was snug. She kept turning. The plastic groaned in protest. "What was that noise?" Kim asked, her voice sharp with concern for her precious new vanity. Morgan gave the wrench one final, decisive heave. There was a sharp crack. A spray of cold water hit her in the face, followed by a gush that began to flood the cabinet and spill out onto the tile floor. "Oh my God!" Kim shrieked, rushing forward. "What did you do?" Morgan stood up slowly and turned to face her sister, pushing the baseball cap off her head. She wiped the water from her face with the back of her hand, her eyes locking with Kim's. Time stopped. Kim's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face, a canvas of mild panic a moment before, was now wiped clean with utter, incomprehending shock. The color drained from her cheeks. She stared at Morgan, at the jumpsuit, at the tool bag, at the water now pooling around their feet. She looked from Morgan's face to the name stitched on the jumpsuit's breast pocket. Hubbard. A detail Morgan had added that morning. Morgan? The name was a whisper, a disbelieving breath. You said you hoped I'd put the money to good use. I did. Morgan's voice terrifyingly calm amidst the sound of rushing water. Kim's eyes darted around the beautiful, spa-like bathroom, then seemed to look past it, through the walls, at the whole house, at the chef's kitchen and the wraparound porch and the manicured lawn. The realization dawned, a slow, horrifying sunrise of comprehension. You're Hubbard? Kim stammered, pointing a trembling finger at her. Helena Hubbard? There is no Helena Hubbard, Morgan said, the words as cold and hard as the tile floor. There's just me, and the home you sold. The water was rising around their ankles now, a miniature, localized flood. It was destroying the vanity, warping the floorboards, ruining the dream. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, 2 feet apart in the spreading disaster. The truth, finally, irrevocably, between them. Kim's perfect world, built on a foundation of betrayal, was literally dissolving at her feet, and the agent of its destruction was the sister whose history she had tried to erase. The eviction notice was delivered by a third-party courier, a formal, impersonal document citing significant, willful property damage and breach of lease terms. There was no further communication. Kim's frantic, tearful voicemails and texts went unanswered. The email account for Hubbard Properties was deleted. Helena Hubbard, having served her purpose, ceased to exist as completely as she had been created. Morgan didn't watch them move out. She couldn't. The victory, so vividly imagined, felt acrid and unsettling in its reality. She had cracked the pipe, yes, but she had also shattered something far more fundamental. The confrontation had not brought the righteous satisfaction she'd craved. Seeing the pure, unadulterated shock on her sister's face, the swift and brutal dawning of a new, terrifying reality, it had felt less like justice and more like cruelty. She had wanted to hold a mirror up to Kim's betrayal, but in the end, she had simply become a different kind of monster. A month after Kim and Mark had vacated the property, Morgan stood once again in the cavernous 2-story foyer of the house on 12 Serenity Lane. It was empty again, but this time the emptiness felt different. It wasn't a blank canvas. It was a scar. A professional restoration company had repaired the water damage in the master bathroom, but Morgan could still see the faint discoloration on the pale oak floorboards just outside the door, a phantom watermark of her rage. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing in a way they hadn't before. The house was hers now, legally and unequivocally. No more shell corporations, no more fake names. Morgan Peterson owned this monument to her own pain. She had won. She had taken her sister's dream, and now it was her prison. The cost had been everything. The inheritance money was gone, swallowed by the down payment. The rest of her life's savings had been poured into the mortgage. She had sacrificed years of her life, alienated her only remaining family, and hollowed herself out in pursuit of this singular goal. And for what? To stand alone in an empty house that smelled faintly of mildew and regret? She ended her tour in the kitchen. On the white quartz countertop, almost invisible against the stone, was a single, small scratch. It hadn't been there before. Perhaps a moving box had scraped it, or a carelessly placed pan. It was a tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect surface, an imperfection that proved someone had lived here. Kim had been here. She had cooked in this kitchen, laughed in this living room, slept in the bedroom upstairs. She had, for a brief, shining moment, been happy here. Morgan ran her finger over the scratch. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a remnant of a life she had deliberately dismantled. She thought of their old house, the one on Chestnut Street. It had been full of scratches, dents, and imperfections. A chip in the banister where she'd hit it with her roller skates, a burn mark on the kitchen counter from their mother's forgotten teapot, a gouge in the living room floor where their father had dropped a heavy toolbox. Those flaws hadn't been damage. They were stories. They were the archive of a shared life. Kim had tried to erase that archive, and in response, Morgan had done the exact same thing, just in a different, more deliberate way. She had wanted to teach Kim that a home wasn't just an asset to be liquidated. But in her cold, meticulous quest, she had treated this house, Kim's home, as exactly that, a weapon, an asset in a war of attrition. Morgan slid down, her back against the kitchen island, until she was sitting on the floor. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes her presence had disturbed. The silence was no longer absolute. It was filled with the ghost of a question. The external goal was complete, her revenge exacted. But what was the internal cost? She had traded her past for a hollow victory. She had become the landlord of her own loneliness. She pulled her phone from her pocket and looked at the last text she'd received from Kim, the one she'd never answered. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please just talk to me." Staring at the words, Morgan felt the cold, hard diamond of her purpose finally dissolve, leaving not peace, but a vast, aching emptiness. She was alone in a house she didn't want, with a victory that felt exactly like a defeat. She had taken her sister's dream. Now, sitting on the floor in a silent, sunlit room, she had to face the unsettling truth that she had no idea how to build one of her own.